The mess hall buzzed with the unmistakable energy of a military training, base metal trays scraping against tables, the clatter of cutlery, and the lively murmur of recruits exchanging stories and jokes. It was the kind of noise that filled every corner, almost like a soundtrack to the daily grind of Navy life. Inside the large, brightly lit room, the smell of reheated food mixed with the sharp scent of disinfectant, and the steady rhythm of footsteps echoed against the tiled floor. The place was packed, a daily crossroads where young men and women in varying stages of their training gathered for a brief respite. In the middle of this controlled chaos, there was a single figure who seemed almost out of place, yet perfectly in her element. She sat alone at a small, worn wooden table near the back of the hall, quietly eating her meal. The woman wore plain navy PT, gear-faded black shorts, and a snug gray t-shirt. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly into a practical ponytail, and her face, though calm, held a quiet intensity. She wasn't flashy. She carried no flashy medals or bold insignia. There was nothing to draw attention except for the way she held herself steady, unshakable, like a rock in the middle of a storm. Her eyes scanned the room briefly, but didn't linger. She was focused on her food, but not distracted. The precision of her movements suggested a practiced mindfulness, almost like she was calibrating herself for what was to come after this quiet lunch. She ate slowly, methodically, no wasted motions, no showboating. It was clear to anyone who looked closely that this wasn't just any Navy personnel. Something was different about her, even if most of the recruits bustling around her failed to notice. Around her, clusters of new recruits laughed loudly, the noise sometimes spilling into boisterous teasing and bravado. These young men were fresh-faced, their energy raw and untamed. They filled the air with the excitement and nerves of those still discovering what Navy life truly demanded. Some wore the remnants of their civilian selves in their jokes and mannerisms. Others were already trying to adopt the sharper edge of military discipline, but all of them carried the unmistakable spark of youth. None of them knew the story behind the woman quietly eating by herself. The mess hall was a great equalizer, a place where everyone, whether fresh recruit or hardened veteran, ate the same food under the same fluorescent lights. Yet even in this equality, hierarchies emerged. The recruits often grouped by class, rank, or familiarity, building small fortresses of camaraderie. They joked about the infamous training programs, told stories of past failures and triumphs, and speculated about who would make it through the toughest challenges. The Navy SEALs, in particular, were a subject of near-mythic reverence and awe, often spoken about in hushed, excited tones. Among the recruits sat 4 young men at a table just a few steps from where she was. Their presence was loud and energetic, and their conversations centered on their dreams of joining elite units, testing their limits, and proving their worth. They had just completed another grueling week of physical training and were savoring the break, energized by a mix of camaraderie and competitive spirit. "Bet I could outlift anyone here, even the women," one of them said with a cocky grin, glancing toward the woman eating nearby. He was tall and broad-shouldered, the kind of recruit who wore his confidence like a second skin. "Yeah, right," another replied, laughing. "There's no way a woman can keep up with us in Hell Week. It's a whole different level." Their laughter rang out, a little rough around the edges, but filled with youthful certainty. They had grown up hearing stories about the Navy SEALs, the legendary men who went through Hell Week, who survived the unforgiving physical and mental gauntlet that separated the ordinary from the extraordinary. To these recruits, SEALs were almost mythical figures, symbols of ultimate strength and resilience. But they hadn't yet learned that strength didn't always look like they expected. The woman at the nearby table didn't respond. She continued eating, her expression unreadable. The recruits noticed her silence, but assumed she wasn't interested, or maybe wasn't paying attention. What they didn't realize was that she was listening carefully, absorbing every word. The dismissive tone, the assumptions, the underestimation, it all landed on her like a challenge she had faced many times before. Her story was far from ordinary. Years earlier, she had been a young recruit herself, driven by the desire to break barriers and prove that determination and grit were not limited by gender. She had endured the brutal Navy SEAL training pipeline, a process so intense that it tested every ounce of physical endurance and mental fortitude. She had survived Hell Week, the grueling stretch where most candidates dropped out, and had earned the coveted SEAL trident that marked her as one of the elite warriors. But she never sought recognition or spotlight. Her focus was on the mission and the team, not on accolades or headlines. To her, humility was as important as strength. The room's noise swelled and ebbed as the lunch period progressed. The four recruits continued their banter, unaware that the woman beside them held a lifetime of experience that dwarfed their bravado. Their conversation shifted from physical strength to training methods, to what it really took to become a SEAL. They joked about the myths surrounding the program, assuming many of the stories were exaggerated. Suddenly, the woman spoke. Her voice was calm, but carried a weight that immediately cut through the noise around them. "Have you ever met a Navy SEAL?" The question was simple but direct. It wasn't asked with arrogance, nor was it a challenge thrown out to provoke. It was a quiet test of awareness. The four recruits fell silent. The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. They glanced at each other, unsure how to respond. None had met a real SEAL, let alone one sitting just feet away from them. The woman's gaze held there steadily, patient but unyielding. She took a small sip of water, then continued, "You talk about Hell Week like it's a story someone told you. But I lived it. I've been in the cold water at 3 a.m., running on no sleep, pushing beyond every limit you can imagine. I've carried teammates when they were about to give up. I've been through the dive training, land warfare, and survival courses." Her tone was factual, almost quiet, but every word landed with the impact of a hammer. The recruits' expressions shifted from amusement to disbelief. This wasn't some officer in a suit or a trainer recounting second-hand tales. This was someone who had been there, who had fought through the fires they barely understood. In that crowded mess hall, with the din of other conversations swirling around them, something changed. The air seemed to grow heavier, as if the room itself was holding its breath. The recruits' bravado began to crack. The stories they had told with such confidence suddenly felt small and incomplete. They had been speaking in assumptions and stereotypes, unaware that the reality of strength and courage could be embodied in someone so quiet, so unassuming. The woman returned to her meal, finishing her bite with the same steady focus as before. No dramatic reveal, no demand for respect. She simply was someone who had endured what most could never imagine, and yet didn't need to announce it. A moment passed, but the shift in the recruits lingered. Within seconds, they had come face to face with a truth they hadn't expected. This woman was a Navy SEAL. The mess hall noise resumed around them, but at their table, a new respect quietly settled in. The woman's presence was a reminder that true strength was often silent, invisible to those who judged by appearances alone. And in that simple, unassuming lunch, a lesson was quietly learned. The four recruits had been sitting at their table, their laughter filling the air, the noise of the mess hall swirling around them. To the outside observer, they looked like any group of young men freshly thrust into the demanding world of Navy training, boisterous, eager, brimming with confidence that often came from inexperience. Their talk was loud and bold, a mixture of bravado and friendly rivalry, the kind that helped mask their nerves about what lay ahead. There was James, a tall, muscular kid from Texas, with a quick smile and an even quicker temper. He liked to joke the loudest, often at the expense of anyone he considered weaker, which was just about everyone at the moment. Beside him sat Marcus, quieter but just as competitive, with an analytical mind that tried to make sense of the chaos around him. Then came Alex, who had a perpetual grin and an endless supply of sarcastic remarks. Lastly, there was Ryan, the youngest of the group, wide-eyed and still soaking in the reality of Navy life. They had been bonding over shared experiences running drills, lifting weights, and surviving their first few days of the grueling training regimen. The physical exhaustion was constant, but their spirits remained high, fueled by dreams of joining the ranks of the Navy's most elite. "Hell Week's coming up next month," James boasted, slapping the table for emphasis. "I'm ready to crush it. Nobody's tougher than me." His tone was cocky, the kind of confidence that bordered on bravado. "Yeah, right?" Marcus said, rolling his eyes but smiling. "You'll be the first to quit." Ryan, still new enough to be impressionable, looked back and forth between the two, unsure where the truth lay. Alex leaned in, lowering his voice with a conspiratorial grin. "Bet I can outlift any of you in this room, including the girls in the training unit." He chuckled, glancing toward the woman nearby, the one who had spoken moments earlier. "No way," James said with a laugh. "Women can't handle the pressure like we can. Especially not in the SEAL teams." That's when the conversation turned. The recruits had no idea that they were speaking so openly, unaware that the woman nearby had overheard every word. They didn't know that their casual dismissals echoed into the very heart of someone who had endured the hardships they joked about. She remained silent for a few moments, her eyes steady on the table in front of her. The recruits noticed her presence, but didn't pay much attention, still caught up in their chatter. But then, without raising her voice, she spoke again. "You think it's easy to get through Hell Week?" she asked softly but clearly, her tone cutting through their conversation like a knife. "You don't know what you're talking about." The recruits stopped abruptly, the laughter dying in their throats. The woman's calm voice, so different from their boisterous tone, grabbed their attention. James frowned, looking her up and down, trying to place her. "Who are you?" he asked, more curious than rude. The woman smiled faintly, a quiet confidence in her eyes. "Someone who's been through it." "Yeah, right," Alex scoffed. "We've all heard stories, but it's mostly myths. No way a woman can survive Hell Week." Marcus shook his head slightly, not wanting to stir the pot, but feeling the tension growing. "We don't mean to be disrespectful," he added, trying to diffuse the moment. The woman's eyes locked on his. "I'm not here for respect. I'm here to tell you the truth." She took a slow breath, her posture relaxed but firm. "Hell Week isn't a joke. It's the toughest test the Navy can throw at anyone physically, mentally, emotionally. It breaks most people. You don't just run, swim, and carry logs. You fight through pain and exhaustion that you never thought possible. You push past every limit your body and mind try to set." The recruits listened, stunned into silence. This wasn't the polished pep talk they expected. It was raw, real, and coming from someone who knew every word was true. "Let me ask you something," she continued. "Have you ever carried a 225-pound log for miles through mud and freezing water? Have you ever gone without sleep for days, faced total exhaustion, but kept going because the team depends on you?" "No," Ryan whispered, eyes wide. "Exactly," she said. "Because you don't know what it means to be a SEAL until you've been there. And yes, I'm a SEAL. I earned that trident just like the men did." The words hung in the air, and suddenly, the four recruits saw her differently. Their bravado faded, replaced by a mixture of awe, disbelief, and newfound respect. James's earlier confidence wavered. "You're serious?" She nodded. "Dead serious." The recruits exchanged glances, their earlier assumptions crumbling under the weight of reality. This wasn't just some story. They were talking to a woman who had survived the same brutal training they were about to face. "You've been through Hell Week?" Marcus asked, barely able to believe it. "More than once," she said. "And every time, it taught me something new about strength. Strength isn't about size or gender. It's about heart, willpower, and refusing to quit." Alex, who had been the most vocal skeptic, swallowed hard. "How did you do it?" he asked, genuinely curious. "I focused on the mission," she replied. "On the team. I stopped thinking about myself and started thinking about what I owed the people counting on me. That's what gets you through commitment." The recruits nodded slowly, their eyes glued to her face. They were beginning to understand that this woman wasn't just an ordinary Navy member. She was a symbol of everything they aspired to be, but hadn't yet realized. The mess hall around them continued its noisy rhythm, but at their table, a quiet shift had taken place. The four young men sat in a circle, absorbing the reality of what they had just learned. Ryan broke the silence. "I don't think I've ever met anyone like you." The woman smiled, but there was no pride or arrogance in it. "Most people don't see what it takes. They only hear the stories. That's why I'm here to remind you it's real. And if you want to make it through, you have to be ready to work harder than you ever imagined." James nodded slowly. "I guess I underestimated what it takes." "Good," she said simply. "Because underestimating your challenges will get you killed out there." For a few moments, none of them spoke. The recruits stared down at their trays, each lost in thought. The conversation had changed everything. They were no longer just kids joking about their futures. They were men facing a harsh reality, inspired by someone who had walked the path ahead. Finally, Marcus looked up. "Thanks for telling us. We needed to hear that." She nodded again, gathering her things. "Remember, strength comes from the inside. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." As she rose to leave, the recruits watched in silence. Her presence lingered like a quiet force, challenging everything they thought they knew. James called out, voice steady this time. "Good luck out there, ma'am." She smiled, a hint of warmth in her eyes. "You too." With that, she disappeared into the crowd, leaving the four recruits forever changed. They returned to their meal, but the conversation had shifted, the myths of toughness replaced by a new understanding. And in the heart of that noisy mess hall, the seeds of respect had been planted. For the four young men, it was a moment they would carry throughout their training, a reminder that the true measure of a Navy SEAL wasn't in words, but in the quiet strength and determination to never quit. The mess hall's noise seemed to dull around the four recruits as the reality of the woman's words sank in. She was a Navy SEAL, a title that carried weight, reverence, and stories of unimaginable toughness. Yet even after her quiet revelation, the lingering attitudes of ignorance and stereotype didn't entirely vanish. It was a truth many hadn't yet shed, especially young recruits who were still learning to see beyond surface impressions. As the woman began to pack up her tray, ready to slip away into the hum of base life, one of the recruits, Alex, the most outspoken, couldn't help himself. The nervous energy that clung to their conversation didn't fully fade. Fueled by a mix of bravado and lingering doubt, he blurted out, "Look, I'm not trying to disrespect, but honestly, don't you think the Navy SEALs are mostly guys? I mean, it's just so physical. Can a woman really handle that kind of pressure?" The question hung in the air, sharp and awkward. The other three recruits exchanged uneasy glances. Marcus's face tightened, clearly uncomfortable, but James just shrugged, a flicker of uncertainty flashing behind his confident facade. The woman paused. Her eyes narrowed not in anger, but in measured disbelief. It was a question she had heard countless times before, spoken in different words, but always rooted in the same skepticism. For many, it was hard to imagine a woman surviving where men often failed, where the line between mental and physical exhaustion was razor thin, and the stakes were life or death. "Do you think I haven't asked myself the same question?" She replied quietly, almost as if talking to herself. Then she looked directly at Alex, her voice steady and calm. "If it were just about physical strength, maybe you'd have a point. But it's not. It's about endurance, strategy, teamwork, and a will to never quit." Her words carried a gravity that silenced the table. The recruits listened as she continued, willing to share what so few had the privilege or courage to understand. "Hell Week isn't just about lifting weights or swimming long distances," she said, her voice steady but filled with conviction. "It's about pushing your mind beyond what you thought was possible. It's about waking up after just a few hours of broken sleep, cold and wet, and still finding the strength to carry a teammate who can't move." She paused, taking a breath, letting her experience settle over them like a quiet storm. "I've seen guys give up when their bodies failed them," she said. "And I've seen women push past pain that would have broken most people. The body can only do so much. The rest is willpower and heart." The recruits were quiet now. The woman's calm authority was unmistakable, and for the first time, they began to glimpse the invisible qualities that defined a true SEAL. Her stories were not boastful, but lived reality testaments to a resilience few ever witnessed firsthand. Alex, still grappling with his own preconceived notions, tried to process what he'd just heard. "But Hell Week is brutal. I mean, it's designed to break people. How did you do it?" His tone was softer now, less confrontational and more curious. She smiled faintly, the hint of pride tempered by humility. "By focusing on what mattered most. The team, the mission, and by remembering that quitting wasn't an option." Her answer was simple but profound. She spoke not as a woman trying to prove a point, but as a warrior who had earned her place through sweat, pain, and unyielding determination. Marcus, who had been quietly absorbing everything, spoke up. "Did you ever feel like you had to work twice as hard? Prove yourself more than the men?" The woman's eyes softened slightly. "Every day." The pressure was real. But it wasn't about competing against men. It was about competing against myself, breaking my own limits. That's what kept me going. She leaned back, taking a moment to collect her thoughts. The recruits were hanging on every word, the veil of ignorance lifting piece by piece. "You have to understand," she said. "The Navy doesn't hand out the SEAL Trident based on gender or looks. It's earned by passing the same brutal tests that everyone faces, no exceptions. If you make it through, you earn your place. Plain and simple." The recruits nodded, beginning to appreciate the reality behind the title they had once only admired from afar. James, who had been skeptical from the start, now seemed humbled. "I didn't realize it was that intense. I mean, I thought it was all about strength and stamina, but it sounds like there's so much more." "There is," she confirmed. "Physical strength is important, but the mental game, that's what separates the SEALs from the rest. It's about embracing discomfort, pushing beyond your fears, and knowing your teammates have your back." The conversation shifted subtly. The recruits stopped seeing her as just a woman or an abstract figure and began to recognize the depth of her experience. Her presence was a living testament to what it truly meant to be a SEAL. Ryan, still young and eager, asked the question on everyone's mind. "What was the hardest part for you?" She thought for a moment. "Hell Week, without a doubt. The physical pain, the mental exhaustion, but also the doubt, the voices inside your head telling you to quit. You have to silence those voices." Her honesty was striking. She wasn't romanticizing the training, but showing it in all its raw, difficult reality. The recruits sat back, absorbing the weight of her words. The mess hall noise returned slowly around them, but their world had shifted. Alex, who had been so quick to dismiss, finally nodded with respect. I guess I have a lot to learn. She smiled again, the kind that carried warmth without pretense. We all do. That's why every day is a test. The 4 recruits looked at her, not with skepticism, but with admiration. For the first time, they saw past the stereotypes and understood that being a SEAL man or woman was about something far deeper than physical prowess. It was about courage, resilience, and heart. As she gathered her things to leave, the recruits watched in silence. The lesson they had learned in just a few minutes was one they would carry with them throughout their training and their lives. She turned briefly, a soft voice behind her. Respect is earned, not given. Remember that. And with that, she disappeared into the bustling crowd of the mess hall, leaving the 4 recruits with a quiet legacy of strength and determination. They sat there, their conversation stilled, their minds racing. The myths about SEALs, about strength, about women, they were all changing in real time. In those few moments, something profound had happened. A wall of ignorance had been broken down by one woman's quiet but unshakable truth. The woman had slipped away into the maze of tables and recruits in the mess hall, but her presence lingered like a subtle but powerful force. The 4 young men sat still, processing the moment they had just shared. The din of the lunch crowd rose and fell around them, but at their small corner of the mess hall, time seemed to slow. James, Marcus, Alex, and Ryan were no longer the carefree recruits who had joked loudly just minutes before. They had been touched, almost shaken, by the unexpected encounter with someone who embodied what they aspired to become. But more than aspiration, they were left with a heavy dose of reality, a reality that shattered many of the assumptions they had carried like armor. Marcus was the first to break the silence. You know, he began thoughtfully, I never really thought about what it takes to be a SEAL. I mean, I've read the stories, but hearing it straight from someone who's lived it? That's something else. Ryan nodded eagerly. Yeah, and it's not just physical. It's mental too. I never realized how much your mind has to be ready, or how important it is to push through even when your body says stop. Alex, still somewhat humbled, but with that signature smirk returning, added, I guess I was wrong about the whole women can't be SEALs thing. I mean, she handled us without even raising her voice. That takes a kind of strength I didn't know was real. James, who had been quiet for a moment, looked down at his tray. I think I underestimated a lot of things, he admitted. Her story. It made me realize how little I really know about what it takes. There was an unspoken respect settling between them, deeper than any words could convey. It wasn't the kind of respect born out of obligation or formal rank. It was genuine, hard-earned respect for someone who had proven herself in the most brutal way imaginable. As they sat there, the recruits began to reflect on their own journey. The Navy's training was relentless, pushing them to the edge of their limits. They had experienced exhaustion, pain, and frustration. Yet hearing from someone who had survived the worst made their struggles feel both more real and more surmountable. What do you think it was like for her? Ryan asked softly. Being one of the few women to make it through? Marcus shrugged. Probably harder than for most. Not just because of the physical challenges, but because she had to fight against expectations, people thinking she couldn't do it just because she's a woman. Yeah, Alex said, tapping his fingers on the table. I guess that kind of pressure would be insane. But she didn't let it show. Not once. That's what makes her a SEAL, James said quietly. Not just the training, but the mindset. For a moment, their conversation was interrupted by the clang of trays being cleared and the footsteps of officers walking past. The recruits straightened, suddenly aware of the eyes that sometimes judged them in this place, a place where appearances mattered, but where true strength was invisible until tested. Alex leaned forward, a new determination in his voice. "I don't want to be the guy who talks tough, but folds under pressure. If she can do it, so can I." "That's the spirit," Marcus agreed. "It's not about being the biggest or loudest. It's about heart. And from what she said, that's what counts." Ryan smiled, still wide-eyed, but more focused now. "I want to prove myself, not just to others, but to myself." James nodded, a serious look crossing his face. "We all do." The moment was quiet, but powerful. The four recruits had found common ground in a shared respect for a woman who had shattered their assumptions and inspired them to see beyond the surface. Across the mess hall, the woman had moved on. She didn't linger for praise or attention. Her mission was always forward-focused, quiet, steady, and unwavering. But in that moment, a subtle bond had formed between her and the four young men. It was a bond rooted not in rank or gender, but in shared purpose and the relentless pursuit of excellence. As the lunch hour wound down, the recruits finished their meals in reflective silence. The lessons they had learned were not part of any official curriculum, but would stay with them forever. They stood up together, shoulders squared and eyes brighter with newfound resolve. "Let's make sure we're ready for Hell Week," James said firmly. "We owe it to her and to ourselves." The others nodded in agreement. As they filed out of the mess hall, the echoes of their earlier skepticism had been replaced by a quiet determination. A determination forged in respect, challenge, and the undeniable truth that strength comes in many forms. The woman's story had become a catalyst for change, planting seeds of understanding that would grow throughout their training. And though she was gone from their sight, the lessons she imparted remained silent, unyielding, and powerful. The days following that lunch in the mess hall felt different for the four recruits. James, Marcus, Alex, and Ryan returned to their training routines with a new mindset. Their earlier casual attitudes replaced by a quiet determination that had been sparked by their encounter with the woman, Navy SEAL. The training was relentless. As expected, but now it wasn't just about enduring for the sake of survival. It was about embodying the true spirit of what it meant to be a SEAL candidate. They pushed harder, focused more, and supported each other in ways they hadn't before. Each grueling drill, whether swimming in freezing water, carrying heavy loads through muddy terrain, or enduring sleepless nights filled with physical punishment, felt more meaningful. The lessons from the mess hall echoed in their minds. Strength was about heart, endurance, and refusing to quit. One morning, the four recruits found themselves lined up with the rest of their platoon, awaiting orders from the instructors. The tension was thick, the usual chatter replaced by a heavy silence. This was the moment they had been preparing for, the first true test of their mental and physical endurance. The instructors, seasoned veterans who had survived Hell Week themselves, barked out commands that sent the recruits scrambling. The task was brutal. A long-distance run followed immediately by a series of obstacle courses, designed to break down the weak and reveal the strong. As they ran, the biting cold air stung their lungs, and their legs screamed in protest. James could feel his muscles tightening, the familiar urge to slow down creeping in. But he remembered the woman's words, the importance of willpower and heart. He glanced over to Marcus, who was breathing hard, but pushing forward. Then to Alex, who gritted his teeth with stubborn determination, and Ryan, who despite his youth showed surprising resilience. Together, they moved as a team, silently encouraging one another through the pain. When they reached the obstacle course, the physical challenge escalated. They hauled themselves over walls, crawled under barbed wire, and navigated slippery ropes suspended over water. Each obstacle demanded more than strength. It required mental focus and trust in their own abilities. James struggled at one point, slipping as he tried to climb a slick rope. For a split second, he panicked, feeling the familiar voice in his head urging him to quit. But then he thought of the woman, the Navy SEAL who had faced these challenges before him, who had endured far worse and never gave up. With renewed determination, he pulled himself up, landing heavily but safely on the other side. The other 3 recruits cheered quietly, their respect for James growing as they witnessed his refusal to give in. After the obstacle course, the recruits were ordered to perform buddy carries, a grueling exercise where they had to carry a fellow recruit over a long distance, simulating rescue under combat conditions. James was paired with Ryan, whose small frame made the task both physically demanding and mentally exhausting. As James hoisted Ryan onto his back, he felt the weight of responsibility settle on him. It wasn't just about finishing the exercise, it was about protecting a teammate, just as the woman had described. Step by step, they moved forward, muscles burning and lungs gasping for air. Every time James wanted to drop Ryan, he thought about the commitment he had made to himself and his team. When they finally crossed the finish line, both men collapsed, gasping but triumphant. Marcus and Alex completed their buddy carries with equal determination, their exhaustion replaced by a sense of accomplishment that was deeply satisfying. Later that evening, as the recruits gathered around a small campfire, the conversation turned to the woman SEAL and the impact she had on them. "I never realized how much this training was about mindset," Marcus admitted. "I used to think it was just physical strength, but it's so much more." Alex nodded. "Yeah, she really changed how I see all of this. She's proof that strength isn't about gender or size, it's about heart." Ryan smiled shyly. "I want to be that strong one day." James looked into the fire, feeling a new sense of purpose. "Me too. I don't want to let anything stop me. Not pain, not doubt, nothing." Their bond had deepened, forged through shared struggle and newfound understanding. They knew the road ahead would only get tougher, but now they had a foundation of respect, determination, and teamwork. Over the next weeks, the recruits faced increasingly intense challenges. The memories of the woman's words stayed with them, a quiet source of strength in the darkest moments. One particularly brutal night, during a cold water swim that left them shivering and exhausted, James felt himself slipping into despair. The freezing water stung his skin, and his body ached with exhaustion. The urge to give up was overwhelming. But then he remembered her face, the calm, steady eyes of the Navy SEAL who had survived Hell Week multiple times. "You have to silence the voices," he whispered to himself, recalling her words. With trembling limbs, he pushed forward, dragging himself to shore alongside the others. That night, as they huddled under wet blankets, James realized something profound. The battle was as much in the mind as it was in the body. The woman's presence in their lives, though brief, had ignited a fire that would not be easily extinguished. The 4 recruits were no longer just hopeful young men. They were warriors in the making, ready to face whatever challenges the Navy threw their way. Their journey had been transformed by one simple truth, that strength transcended gender, and true courage came from within. And in that realization lay the turning point that would shape the rest of their training and their lives. The sun rose slowly over the naval training base, casting long shadows across the barren training grounds. The air was thick with anticipation, a nervous energy that settled like a heavy fog over every recruit. Hell Week, the most grueling, demanding, and infamous phase of Navy SEAL training, was just days away. For James, Marcus, Alex, and Ryan, the stakes had never been higher. The lessons they had learned from their unexpected encounter with the female SEAL had evolved into a steady undercurrent of resolve. They knew Hell Week would push them to the brink and test every ounce of strength, endurance, and mental fortitude they possessed. The woman's story had become a beacon, a symbol of what was possible, even when the odds were stacked against you. For her, Hell Week was not just a test. It was a crucible where character was forged and legends born. For the recruits, it was fast approaching, and the looming dread was palpable. The final preparation, the week leading up to Hell Week, was a whirlwind of activity. Instructors ramped up the intensity, drilling the recruits harder than ever before. Each day was filled with exhausting physical exercises designed to simulate the worst conditions imaginable. There were endless runs over rugged terrain, long swims in frigid open water, brutal calisthenics, and grueling timed obstacle courses. The recruits were pushed beyond fatigue, their bodies screaming in protest. The instructors watched, evaluating, ready to weed out anyone who faltered. Yet amidst the chaos, James noticed something remarkable. His group had grown closer, tighter. Marcus, who had once kept to himself, now moved with quiet confidence. Alex's bravado had matured into focused determination. Ryan, the youngest, showed surprising grit despite his inexperience. Each of them drew strength from the other, and from the invisible thread that connected them to the woman seal's story. During one particularly brutal afternoon, the 4 recruits gathered by the edge of the training pool, catching their breath between laps. The water was cold, stinging their skin, but the physical discomfort paled in comparison to the storm brewing inside their minds. James broke the silence. You ever think about what she went through? Hell Week isn't easy for anyone. But for her, I can't imagine. Marcus nodded solemnly. Yeah, and knowing she did it while fighting against doubt and pressure, that's something else. Makes me think we owe it to ourselves to give everything we've got. Alex, always the firecracker, smirked. Guess it's not just about muscles and speed. It's about heart, like she said. Ryan added quietly, and about never quitting, no matter what. The words hung between them, a promise they silently made to themselves. The night before Hell Week, as night fell, the base settled into an uneasy quiet. The recruits lay on their cots, muscles aching, minds racing. The woman's story was never far from James's thoughts. Her calm determination, the strength she carried even in the darkest moments, seemed almost otherworldly. He wondered how she had survived the mental battles that no training could prepare you for, the isolation, the crushing fatigue, the relentless pressure to give up. James closed his eyes, imagining the scene she had described: freezing cold water, endless hours without sleep, pain so sharp it almost felt like it could break you in two. And yet, through it all, she had endured. For James, Marcus, Alex, and Ryan, Hell Week wasn't just a test of physical ability, it was a test of will. And they were ready to face it. The beginning of Hell Week. The first moments of Hell Week were a brutal awakening. Recruits were roused from sleep in the dead of night by the sharp bark of instructors' commands. There was no rest, no mercy. The cold air bit at their skin as they were herded outside, barely clothed, shivering and exhausted. Without warning, they were plunged into the icy waters of the bay, swimming laps with bodies already drained of energy. James's lungs burned as he fought against the chill, muscles trembling uncontrollably. He thought of the woman seal, her voice steady, her eyes unflinching. You have to silence the voices inside your head. The water was relentless, pulling at him like a current, threatening to drag him under. Every stroke was agony, but he refused to let the panic take over. Beside him, Marcus and Alex moved with grim determination, their faces set in masks of concentration. Ryan, struggling but pushing through, kept pace as best he could. When the swim finally ended, they barely had a moment to catch their breath before the instructors barked orders to run through a series of physical drills, push-ups, sit-ups, lunges, each exercise designed to crush their will. Hours stretched into days with no reprieve. Sleep was scarce and broken. Hunger gnawed at their bellies. Every muscle screamed in protest. But it wasn't just the physical suffering. It was the mental torment that tested them most. Battling the inner demons, by the second day, many recruits began to break. Some collapsed, unable to continue. The instructors didn't hesitate. They were merciless, dragging the weak and weary from the ranks. James watched with growing unease as friends faltered, their bodies beaten down by exhaustion. The thought of quitting flickered dangerously in his mind, but the image of the woman's seal, the embodiment of unwavering strength, kept him going. He found himself repeating her words silently. It's about endurance, strategy, teamwork, and a will to never quit. The night was the hardest. Cold seeped into their bones as they navigated the blacked-out course, crawling through mud and barbed wire, muscles numb and minds fogged by fatigue. At one point, James found himself face down in the muck, the cold sapping his strength. Panic rose in his chest. But then, out of the darkness, he heard a voice, Marcus's voice, encouraging, steady. Come on, James, you got this. Together, they pushed forward, each step a victory against the mental and physical storm. Alex and Ryan were close behind, fighting their own battles, but never giving up. The turning tide, by the third day, a shift began. The recruits who remained started to transform. What had once been sheer survival instinct grew into a deeper understanding of what it truly meant to be a SEAL. James noticed the way the group moved together, supporting each other, sharing what little strength they had left, pushing past individual pain for the sake of the team. There was no room for ego here, only trust. During a particularly grueling boat carry, exercise hauling heavy inflatable crafts over rocky terrain, James felt his body faltering. The weight was crushing, his shoulders raw and bleeding. But then he glanced over at the others. Marcus's eyes locked with his, filled with fierce determination. Alex was grinning, pushing through his own pain like a warrior possessed. Ryan's small frame belied an iron will. Together, they pushed the boat forward, step by step, refusing to yield. The final night, the last night of Hell Week, was a test unlike any other. The recruits were ordered to navigate a treacherous swim in the dark, followed by a grueling march across uneven terrain with little rest. Fatigue had turned to numbness. Hunger gnawed relentlessly. Every movement was agony. James's mind raced as exhaustion threatened to swallow him whole. But in the back of his mind, the woman SEAL's story echoed once more. You have to silence the voices inside your head. He clenched his jaw, forcing one foot in front of the other. He could feel his teammates beside him, Marcus, Alex, Ryan, all equally broken, but unwilling to quit. In that moment, something shifted within James. It wasn't just willpower, it was something deeper. A quiet, fierce fire that refused to be extinguished. They were no longer just recruits fighting for survival. They were becoming SEALs. Emerging from the fire, when the grueling week finally ended, the survivors collapsed in exhaustion, but also in triumph. James, Marcus, Alex, and Ryan had made it through Hell Week, a feat few could claim. Their bodies were battered, their spirits tested, but their resolve was unbroken. The woman SEAL's story had been their guiding light, a reminder that strength was not about gender or appearance, but about heart and determination. As they lay under the stars, catching their breath, James looked over at his teammates and smiled a smile born of shared pain, unbreakable bonds, and newfound respect for the journey ahead. They had survived Hell Week, and they were ready for whatever came next. The dawn following Hell Week broke quietly over the naval training base, a calm contrast to the storm that had just passed. The survivors, those few recruits who had endured the punishing week, lay scattered across the training grounds, their bodies battered, minds still reeling from the relentless trials they had faced. Among them were James, Marcus, Alex, and Ryan, whose journey had been forever transformed by their shared experience and the inspiration of the woman, Navy SEAL they had encountered months earlier. The weight of survival for James, the feeling of surviving Hell Week, was not simply relief. It was a complex mix of exhaustion, pride, and a daunting sense of responsibility. The weeks ahead promised new challenges, but the memory of those 7 days, each filled with near impossible physical demands and crushing mental pressure, would forever shape who he was. He remembered vividly the moments when quitting had seemed inevitable, the icy water biting through his wetsuit, his legs trembling as he hauled heavy boats over rocky ground, the endless marshes with barely any food or sleep. Every time, it was the image of the woman seal that pulled him through. Her quiet strength, her relentless determination, her refusal to surrender to pain or doubt. Those qualities were no longer abstract ideas. They were now part of him. Marcus, too, felt the burden of survival weighing heavily. For someone who had once doubted his own capabilities, Hell Week had been a harsh awakening. But emerging on the other side had ignited a fierce confidence. "I never thought I could push this far," Marcus admitted one evening as they sat quietly by the edge of the base, watching the sun set behind distant mountains. "But now, I don't want to look back. I want to keep going." Alex, who had always been the cockiest of the group, had become more introspective. The grueling tests had humbled him in ways he hadn't anticipated. He no longer talked about proving himself to others. His fight was internal, a battle to be better than he was the day before. Ryan, youngest of the group, was exhausted beyond words, but carried an undeniable spark. His eyes shone with determination, the flame of a warrior ignited in a boy. The reality sets in yet. Despite the victory, the reality of Navy SEAL training was unforgiving. Hell Week was only the beginning, not the end. For James and his teammates, the coming weeks meant more challenges, advanced tactics, weapons training, combat drills, and long nights filled with little sleep. The instructors were clear. Many would still fall away. Many would not finish the journey. But James felt different. He was no longer the uncertain recruit who had doubted himself months before. Now, he was someone who had faced the abyss and refused to fall. The woman SEAL story had carved a new path for him, not just as a soldier, but as a person. He often found himself reflecting on what she had said during their brief encounter in the mess hall. Her quiet confidence, her unshakable belief in the power of mental strength, had been like a seed planted deep within him. Lessons beyond the physical. In the weeks following Hell Week, James began to understand that being a Navy SEAL was about more than physical endurance. It was about leadership, humility, and emotional intelligence, qualities often overlooked but crucial in the chaos of combat. One afternoon, during a classroom session on leadership and decision-making, the instructor challenged the recruits with a question: what does it mean to lead? The room was silent. Many recruits thought leadership was about commanding, about being the toughest or the loudest voice. James raised his hand, recalling the lessons from the woman SEAL. Leadership, he said, is about understanding your team, knowing when to push and when to support. It's about leading by example, not just by orders. The instructor nodded approvingly. Exactly. Leadership is earned through respect and trust. You can't demand it. You must inspire it. The conversation resonated deeply with James. He realized that the woman SEAL had embodied this principle in every interaction: quiet strength, unwavering resolve, and a deep understanding of her teammates' needs. The bond of brotherhood. As the training intensified, the bond between James, Marcus, Alex, and Ryan grew stronger. They became more than teammates. They were brothers in arms, united by shared hardship and a commitment to each other's success. In moments of despair, it was this brotherhood that sustained them. When exhaustion threatened to consume them, when injuries flared and doubts crept in, they leaned on one another. During long night marches, when the world was silent, except for the crunch of boots on gravel, they whispered encouragement and shared quiet jokes to lighten the mood. Their friendship became a lifeline, a source of resilience that no amount of physical pain could break. The unexpected challenge one day, months into their training. The recruits were faced with an unexpected challenge, an intense combat simulation that would test everything they had learned. The scenario was brutal. A nighttime raid on a hostile compound, requiring stealth, precision, and split-second decision-making under extreme pressure. James and his team were assigned as the lead unit. The stakes were high. Failure meant simulated capture or worse. As they prepared, the familiar nervous energy bubbled beneath their calm exteriors. This was what they had trained for, yet nothing could fully prepare them for the chaos of real combat conditions. Moving through the darkness, relying on night vision goggles and hand signals, the team advanced with caution. Every shadow was a threat. Every sound heightened their senses. At one point, an unexpected explosion rocked the compound. Disoriented but focused, James took command, directing his teammates with steady, clear commands. In the chaos, Alex was momentarily separated. Panic flared in James's chest, but he pushed it down. The training, the discipline, the lessons from the woman SEAL, who never lost her composure, they all kicked in. James moved swiftly to regroup, communicating with Marcus and Ryan to secure the perimeter while searching for Alex. After tense moments, they found Alex hiding behind a wall, shaken but unharmed. The team rallied, completing the mission with precision and efficiency. Reflection and growth after the simulation, the instructors gathered the recruits for a debrief. The praise was tempered with constructive criticism, highlighting areas for improvement. James felt a surge of pride mixed with humility. They had succeeded, but the journey was far from over. That night, around a small fire, James shared his thoughts with Marcus, Alex, and Ryan. "We're not just here to survive or finish," he said quietly. "We're here to become something greater than ourselves." Marcus nodded. "And we're doing it together." Alex added with a grin, "Yeah, no quitting. No backing down." Ryan looked around at his brothers in arms, the exhaustion in his eyes replaced by fierce determination. "We owe it to her," he said simply. A new chapter, the encounter with the woman SEAL, had started as a simple moment, a chance meeting in a mess hall. But for James and his friends, it had become the spark that ignited their transformation. They understood now that strength was not defined by gender or appearance, but by heart, resilience, and unwavering commitment. The story of the woman SEAL was more than just an inspiration. It was a living testament to the power of perseverance. As they prepared for the final phases of their training, James felt a deep sense of gratitude for the lessons learned, the bonds forged, and the journey that had changed them forever. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: they were ready. The final stretch of Navy SEAL training loomed ahead, a series of relentless tests that would push James, Marcus, Alex, and Ryan to their absolute limits. Months of grueling preparation had brought them to this precipice. Each of them carried scars, both visible and hidden, and memories of battles fought in frozen waters, muddy fields, and sleepless nights. But now, they stood ready to face their last and most daunting challenge, the culmination of everything they had endured, the ultimate crucible that would separate the true SEALs from those who fell short. The final test was a 3-day, non-stop operation designed to simulate the realities of warfare. It required endurance, precision, mental agility, and above all, unity. The recruits were dropped into hostile territory, under the cover of darkness, with only minimal supplies and rudimentary maps. Their mission was to infiltrate an enemy stronghold, gather critical intelligence, and extract safely. The cold night air was thick with tension. James could hear the sound of his own breath, sharp and ragged. The memories of the woman SEAL's story, the sacrifices she had made, the obstacles she had overcome burned in his mind like a guiding flame. They moved silently through the dense forest, communicating only through hand signals. Every shadow, every rustle was a potential threat. Yet the group moved with a quiet confidence that had been forged through months of training and shared hardship. Facing the unthinkable midway through the operation, disaster struck. An unexpected patrol crossed their path, forcing a sudden firefight. Bullets whipped past them, adrenaline surging as they ducked behind trees and rocks. In the chaos, Ryan was hit. James saw him stumble, clutching his leg, pain etched across his youthful face. Without hesitation, James rushed to his side, assessing the wound. It was serious, but not life-threatening. Still, time was critical. The team had to decide stay and defend Ryan, or leave him behind and complete the mission. Marcus looked to James, silent understanding passing between them. "We're not leaving him," James said firmly. "We're a team." Using their training, they stabilized Ryan's injury as best they could and carried him toward their extraction point. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on James's shoulders. The woman SEAL's words echoed in his mind again. Strength is not about doing it alone. It's about carrying each other through. Endurance and sacrifice. The journey back was torturous. Ryan's injury slowed them down, every step a struggle. Night turned to dawn, and exhaustion seeped into their bones. But surrender was not an option. The four recruits, now bonded deeper than ever, leaned on each other in ways that transcended words. James remembered the first time they met the woman in the mess hall. She had been surrounded by recruits who underestimated her, and yet, within moments, they realized who she was. She had been a living legend, a testament to courage and perseverance. Now, James understood that they were beginning to embody those very qualities. The moment of truth after hours of grueling effort, they reached the extraction point. Rescue helicopters hovered overhead, their blades whipping the forest into a frenzy. As they prepared to board, James looked around at his teammates. Marcus's face was grim but proud. Alex was breathing hard but steady. Ryan's eyes shone with a fierce, determined light despite the pain. They had survived the unthinkable. Their journey had been more than physical. It had been a transformation of spirit. Graduation and beyond. The day of graduation arrived under bright skies and the proud eyes of instructors, family, and friends. The ceremony was a solemn yet triumphant celebration of endurance, sacrifice, and achievement. James, Marcus, Alex, and Ryan stood together, adorned in their Navy SEAL trident pins, the symbol of their successful transformation into elite warriors. The woman SEAL who had inspired them watched from the sidelines, a knowing smile on her face. Their journey was a tribute to her legacy, a living testament to the power of courage, determination, and unity. A new mission, but as the applause faded and the crowd dispersed, James knew this was only the beginning. Being a Navy SEAL was not just about surviving training, it was about serving, protecting, and leading in the face of the world's darkest challenges. He felt the weight of responsibility settle over him like a second skin. The woman SEAL's story was not just inspiration, it was a call to action. He and his teammates were ready to answer. Reflection years later, James would look back on that time, the chaos, the pain, the victories, with a profound sense of gratitude. The woman SEAL who had walked into the mess hall and quietly changed their lives had taught them more than just endurance. She had taught them to believe in themselves, to rise above doubt, and to fight for something greater than their own survival. Her story and their own journey became part of the rich tapestry of the Navy SEAL legacy, a legacy built on the courage of individuals who refused to quit. Final thoughts. The story of the woman Navy SEAL and the four recruits who realized her true identity within 45 seconds in the mess hall is not just a tale of physical strength. It is a powerful reminder that true strength comes from heart, determination, and the bonds forged through shared struggle. In the unforgiving world of Navy SEAL training, It is those qualities that separate the ordinary from the extraordinary. And in that distinction lies the making of legends.